and welcome to my first video, highlighting the potential for the Paladin to AoE farm various dungeons in classic World of Warcraft. We are going to go ahead and start with a classic dungeon for the Paladin to be able to solo, and that is Stockades. Stockades is an important dungeon to be able to farm on your own for a couple different reasons. The most important reason is that it is used for boosting low-level characters. Depending on what server you're on, you can normally sell a boost for 2 or 3 gold per spot. If you're selling runs for 3 gold per spot, you can easily make 60 gold per hour. It is also easy for the Paladin to hit lockout. If this happens, you can actually log off and go and farm something else on another character while you're waiting for the lockout to finish. Aside from that, a lot of fantastic greens can drop in here. For example, you can get items such as Superior Cloak of Agility or the Bandit Jerkin of the Monkey. Basically any item that is leather and of the monkey, cloth and of the eagle, or mail and of the bear can actually sell for anywhere between 50 silver or even a couple of gold depending on what server you're on. So even if you're not boosting other characters, you can come in here late at night, run Stockades a few times, and maybe even make a few gold off of just running it by yourself. So, how is the Paladin able to solo Stockades? Well, there are 2 items that basically make up the backbone of the Paladin solo carry. The first one is the Demon Forge Breastplate. This is an item made by blacksmiths. It takes 10 demonic runes, 4 blue sapphires, 4 star rubies, and 40 thorium bars. It also requires you to be an armorsmith and to go through a quest that begins in Winterspring and will take you to Upper Blackrock Spire, and then finishes again in Winterspring. So you might be looking at this and saying a 3% chance to steal 120 life from a mob. Well, that really doesn't seem like that much. But you have to remember, you're pulling in an entire instance. I believe in Stockades there's around 70 to 80 mobs. So, the chances of you actually proccing one of these heals is pretty high. On top of that, your spell power actually increases the proc from the Demon Forge Breastplate by 40%. Meaning, if you have 100 spell power, this procs for 160. If you have 200, 200. If you have 300, 240. So, this scales very nicely with your spell power gear. The next big item that is really useful is a Skull Flame Shield. Anybody who's played WoW for any amount of time can tell you the Skull Flame Shield is pretty iconic. Its look, its procs, everything about it is incredibly well known in the WoW community. So as you can see, this has a similar proc. Equip, when struck in combat, has a 3% chance of stealing 35 life from target enemy. Now you might be looking at this and saying, only 35 life? That seems far worse than the armor that you're using. But the Skullflame Shield proc actually increases at a 1-to-1 ratio with your spell power. So again, if you have 100 spell power, that's 135 life. 200 spell power, 235. 300, 335, and so on. So when you have both of these items equipped, you basically have a 6% chance, when hit, to steal a pretty substantial amount of life, depending on your spell power. Now, you don't need a bunch of tier 2 or amazing rings or, trinkets and everything to be a paladin who can solo farm Stockades. I was doing this when I had only 2 or 3 pieces of tier 2, as well as just a couple random pieces from ZG and even Blackrock Depths. But we might as well show you what it looks like in a character that is what I consider almost all best in slot. So, we're going to start with the gear. The helm, tier 2 helm, is pretty much unbeatable. It is 32 spell power, a ton of armor to help with mitigation, a ton of stamina, and a ton of intellect. Now, of course, the more armor you have, the less damage you're going to take from these mobs, as everything in Stockades is physical damage. Now, you don't have to have this, but it definitely helps. Having the Zul'Gurub enchant is really nice. So as far as necks go, I really like the neck from Zul'Gurub because it has 22 spell power, which is really nice, and 3 mana per 5 seconds. You do end up using a very large amount of mana because of Consecration, so the 3 MP5 is really nice. Another neck that is really easy to get is the Darkmoon Fair neck. Next, I have Zul'Gurub's shoulders, because I don't know how, but I have somehow missed getting tier 2 shoulders on this Paladin, even though I've been doing BWL for months. So, when you're doing this, you want to get the Zul'Gurub enchant of 18 spell damage and healing to your shoulders. Nothing is better when you're solo AoE farming. It costs 15 honor tokens, and the cost of bijous right now are around 1 gold or less, making this an incredibly cheap enchantment. You just have to be exalted with the Zandalari trolls to be able to get it. Again, not a difficult thing to do. Next is a spell power cloak, also from Zul'Gurub. This is 23 spell power with some decent stats on it. I've been lazy and I haven't put 70 armor on it, mostly because I don't need it. Again, the Demon Forge breastplate, you get this from blacksmiths. What is notable though is that we have Absorption 25. This is kind of a lesser known enchantment. What it means is that you have a 5% chance when struck to absorb 25 damage. Meaning if this procs 4 times, it has now been more effective than 100 health to chest. So I highly recommend getting this enchantment over anything else. Next we have tier 2 wrists. Again, a large amount of stats, a large amount of armor, and a little bit of spell power, making them completely ideal for this. On top of that, I've decided to put mana regen on the bracers. This is good for healing, this is good for tanking, this is good for AoE farming. After that, again, tier 2 gloves, lots of stats, and for the enchantment I decided to put defense plus 3. Plus 7 agility is very nice and does add some armor and a bit of dodge, but if you ever want to tank or you just want to be a little bit beefier, I find the plus 3 defense actually gives you a bit more tankiness. After that, again, the obvious choice is tier 2 belt. 23 spell power, tons of stats, tons of armor, can't go wrong. Again, tier 2 legs with the Zul'Gurub enchant. These are great because not only do they have a pretty hefty amount of spell power, but they also have an MP5. Last but not least, we have the tier 2 boots. Again, I decided to put defense plus 3. The only reason that I did not put run speed on these is because oftentimes I use a Zandalari speed pot. So the 20% increased speed does not stack with the minor speed on boots, so it's kind of irrelevant. Next, I have one of the highest spell power rings in the game. The Ring of Spell Power kind of lives up to its name. Now, you don't have to have rings, again, that are this kind of, best in slot. You can do just fine with a Maiden Circle, as well as the ring from doing the Save the Princess in Blackrock Depths. Those are completely fine and have 18 spell power in each. Maiden Circles have actually dropped quite significantly in price, at least on our server. Next, I have the Band of Servitude, which is from, once again, Zul'Gurub. If you haven't noticed, there are tons of items in ZG that you can get that are pretty darn good for AoE farming. Next, we have a really important piece when it comes to AoE farming, and that is Force of Will. And actually, Force of Will in Phase 5 has become way easier to obtain as it now drops from Angerforge and has a fairly high drop chance. So you don't have to go all the way to Emperor to try and farm this anymore, as its loot table has been swapped. So, again, it says when struck in combat, has a 1% chance of increasing all melee damage taken by 25 for 10 seconds, and of course, defense plus 7. Now again, you might be thinking, 1% chance? That really doesn't seem very high. But again, you have to remember, we are pulling in an entire dungeon. So when you have 50 to 80 mobs hitting you, the chances of this proccing becomes very high. Finally, we have another really standout trinket, the Styling's Impeding Scarab from BWL. Increases your chance to block by 5%. Because you're basically going to be blocking a lot, this says reduce melee damage by 5%. On top of that, it has another increased defense by 13, making it more common for you to block, parry, dodge, or for things to just miss you. And then finally, any spell power weapon is going to do. Or you can actually use the Hikari Manslayer from ZG as well. So again, this has a lifesteal effect on it. And guess what? This also increases at a 1-to-1 ratio with your spell power. So again, if you have like 300 spell power, this is going to heal you for about 350 life. If you can't get your hands on a really good spell power weapon, I would highly recommend this one. Aside from that, you could have things like a Quell Surar, which is just going to give you more armor and more survivability. Or you could have something really fun, like Hand of Edward the Odd, which gives you a chance to have an instant cast heal every once in a while. The proc rate is not super high, but if your gear is really not up to snuff and you're finding yourself low on health while running this can be a great addition to your arsenal, as these have also dropped significantly in price, at least on our server. So, while this is some of the best gear that you can have, this is definitely not what is necessary for doing this farm. So let's go ahead and look at our spec. So, as a paladin, farming and making gold is not that easy, so the last thing that you want to do is constantly be switching spec and losing 50 gold every time you want to go farm. So the spec that I have designed pretty much does the best when it comes to healing, as well as being able to go out and solo farm and, big AoE pulls. So we have 5 points in Divine Intellect. Of course, you just want more intellect. That is more of your mana pool to cast Consecrate, as well as a bit of a higher chance of critting with your spells. Some points in Divine Strength. They're basically leftover points. The reason we put this in here is because your strength actually helps you block more damage. So if you decide to AoE pull much higher level mobs than in Stockades, this is going to help. 5 points in Spiritual Focus. If you do need to get a heal off, having the resist to pushback is incredibly useful. Healing Light increases your heal, good and raid, and if you have to get yourself up in an AoE farm. Consecration is basically the crux of your AoE farm. This is where the vast majority of your damage is going to come from, especially when you have a lot of spell power. Improved Lay on Hands, this is basically good for raiding, as well as if you're in a pinch. This will give you a ton of extra armor, as well as heal you to full, so you're not going to die versus a large pull. Next we have Illumination. Illumination is of course good for raiding, as well as for keeping your mana pool higher during large pulls. Whenever you crit with the heal, you gain 100% of that mana back. Divine Favor makes your next heal a automatic crit. With Illumination at 5 stacks, that means it is a free heal. Well, it's a 60 mana heal, but it's always going to be a crit. Finally, 5 points into Holy Power, which of course gives your holy spells an extra chance to crit, meaning more chance to get mana back, and also just to heal you back to full in 1 Holy Light. Next is 5 points in Redoubt. While Redoubt is not going to be useful in the lower dungeons, because the chances of being crit are incredibly low, especially with defense gear, this is more for your higher level dungeons and higher level AoE farms. If you're crit, it gives you a 30% chance increase to your block. This is invaluable for survival. Toughness is fantastic. It's going to give you a huge amount of extra mitigation when it comes to melee damage. Blessing of Kings is mostly for raid buffing, but it is also nice to have just for dungeons, and sometimes you'll use it on yourself too in case you want that extra mana pool. Improved Righteous Fury, 3 of 3, might seem very strange to others, but I often find myself tanking dungeons with this spec. This spec is actually good enough to AoE tank dungeons. Or if you want, you can do things like the BRD Arena farm, and having Improved Righteous Fury is more than good enough to hold aggro against Blizzard and Hellfire. Next is Shield Specialization. Increases the amount of damage that you are absorbed by your shield by 30%. Again, in the lower levels, not going to matter too much. But in the high level dungeons, things like Dire Maul jump runs, again, this is invaluable. A few points in Anticipation. just so you have enough points to get the absolute winner and the most necessary skill for all of this. Blessing of Sanctuary. So what this blessing does is that for 5 minutes or 10 minutes for the greater blessing, it reduces the incoming damage that you take, and whenever you block, the mob that you blocked also takes increased damage. So for the greater blessing, every time you block, they take an extra 35 damage, and all incoming melee damage is going to be reduced by 24. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, 24 damage, but at the low levels, again, you have to remember, these mobs aren't hitting very hard anyways. So, between your Blessing of Sanctuary and your massive amount of armor, and on top of your blocks, your parries, your dodges, you are having a huge amount of mitigation. The other reason that I like stylings and blocking so much is that when you block, that actually counts as being hit. So when you block, it still has a chance of triggering your shield and has a chance of triggering your breastplate. Alright, so let's go ahead and give an example of what it is like to run a Stockades in just regular gear, nothing going on. And let's go ahead and get a timer going on. So as you notice, I also have a swing timer add-on. I find this pretty useful, especially when seal weaving if I decide to go ret. Aside from that, it lets me know when the other people are swinging, and against PvP this is also pretty nice. You'll notice that the mobs will periodically put a disease on you. That disease increases the physical damage that you take. Honestly, I probably don't have to cleanse these because my gear is so high. If your gear is not quite up to snuff, again, you need to cleanse this off. I've seen this where it is stacked up to around 7, and it can really start to hurt. So as you notice, we are miss, dodge, parry, block. They barely hit us at all. And when they do hit us, they're hitting us for single digit 10 or 11 damage. We have so much mitigation that even with one of the diseases on us, really we don't take that much damage. When mages run this place, if they get stunned, it can be pretty detrimental and sometimes just end a run and they're dead. So, at the end of each room, you might notice that I am dropping a consecration. I'm doing that because it essentially ensures that the entire room is going to get pulled. I normally try to drop a consecration right at the door of the cell, and that normally ensures that everything in the room is going to get pulled. You might also notice I'm strafing as well as trying to keep, random stun. I'm also trying to keep myself turned towards the mobs. If you're facing away from the mobs, you cannot parry and you cannot block. So as you see, that is a ton of diseases that is starting to add up, and we want to cleanse those off immediately. That was a big heal proc. We got a little low there, but kind of trust your gear to get you through this. If you feel like you're getting a little bit too low, go ahead and throw up one of your Seal of Lights, and that'll help heal you back to full. But as you can see, we are pretty much already back to full. Once you get your back turned, you'll be blocking, parrying, and dodging much more, and as you can see, our gear has pretty much taken care of things without a problem. So now we're watching at our Retribution Aura, our Consecration, and our just regular weapon swings are pretty much taking care of everything. We did end up using a pretty hefty amount of mana, getting rid of all of those diseases, so we will have to drink before the other side. Now with this build in my gear, I am able to pull this dungeon all in one pull, but for people who, again, may not have as good of gear, one pulling the entire dungeon might not be something that you are capable of. So I recommend pulling the middle, then pulling the left, then pulling the right. If you have kind of mediocre or decent gear, then I would highly recommend doing the middle and then the left side. So what you might not know if you haven't solo farmed this place before is that the middle and the left side are actually lower level mobs than on the right side. On top of that, the mobs on the right side also do a stun, and you can be stunned upwards of 8 to 10 seconds at a time. making it kind of a miserable experience. Again, if you're a mage and you're trying to farm this place, it can just outright get you killed, and many of them don't recover from it. As a paladin, you honestly just don't care. As you saw, we did get low, but we trusted in our gear and it carried us through. So on this side, I normally start with a Seal of Wisdom, get my mana back up, and keep my mana full as we're going through. We got a nice early proc with one of our items that should have been our armor. So if you see a mob turn green for a long time, that normally means it's the Demon Forge breastplate that got the proc. And again, these guys stun constantly. You can get shield bashed, you can get backhanded. If you get the dwarf, who is the rare spawn, he can actually judgment you. I think the longest I've ever been stunned consecutively is around 12 to 14 seconds. But as you can see, because of our gear, we trust in it. Even when we get stunned, we kind of just don't care and we keep on trucking. So, you can continually drop rank 1 consecrations as you're running, and it'll get extra damage on the mobs, but frankly, it's not all that necessary. Once you get everything piled up at the end, it's easy to just AoE it all down. And again, as you saw, we were getting low, but we trust our gear to heal us back up to full. Once you get high enough gear, basically you can trust it. But again, if you are not quite up to my gear level, I recommend taking some caution and doing smaller pulls, as well as making sure that you keep an eye on your bubbles. I've seen many people actually die on this side, people with pretty decent gear, because they kind of underestimated the stuns. So, now we can put up a Seal of Light if we want. Seal of Wisdom's not necessary, as everything is just going to die. As you can see, our Consecration is doing 64-65 damage. We have a lot of spell power. As you can see, all these mobs are turning green. Anytime you see a shield appear above my head and you kind of hear a chunk sound, that is actually our Force of Will proccing. So if you look throughout the video, you will see that shield appear and we will get the Force of Will proc. So even going incredibly slow and even drinking, this is a sub 7 minute Stockades run, meaning that you're going to hit lockout in 35 minutes on your first hour. After that, you're still going to hit it incredibly fast as long as the people that you're carrying go ahead and leave quickly as well. So that's it. That is what you can do to solo run Stockades. Again, this is good for selling carries, or it's really good for going out and just farming greens and sometimes twink items. There are a bunch of really good level 19 twink items that drop in here. Feet of the Lynx, Sentry Cloak, Twisted Chanter's Staff, and a few others. But after that, we'll be right back and we're going to see how can we push running Stockades to its absolute limits. Alright, so now we're going to see how we can push Stockades to its absolute limits using some pretty cheap items. These items are actually really good if you do not have the same gear quality as I have. These can make somebody with mediocre gear still be able to run these instances incredibly fast. So, one of the most powerful items you can use when solo farming Stockades is a Swiftness of Zanza pot. So you can get these for 1 honor token from the Zandalari tribe vendor, and in our server, a token is like less than a gold, so these are super cheap. Next, Arcane Elixir. These are great for 30 minutes at a time and only cost about 1 gold. So if you are having trouble for 1 gold, you can almost get 1 lockout per 1 gold. So if you want to get a little bit of extra oomph, not only to your Consecrate, but to your heals, Arcane Elixirs are the way to go. And frankly, you could probably get these for less than 1 gold if you farm the mats yourself. Next are Lesser Wizard Oils. These are going for rock bottom prices on my server. People are using Lesser Wizard Oils as a way to level up their enchanting. So I had someone actually give me an entire mail full of these. Like 12 of these were sitting in my mail because they just didn't know what to do with them and they don't sell. The next two items that are incredibly useful and can be cheap depending on your server are Crystal Charge. You get Crystal Charges from Ungoro. I believe it is the Eastern Pylon, and you get them from turning in 10 yellow crystals and 10 red crystals. If you're not an engineer, or even if you are an engineer, these are an incredibly cheap AoE grenade. Next is Crystal Spire. Again, this is an Ungoro Pylon, and I believe this is the Northern Pylon turn-in. This takes 10 yellow crystals and 10 blue crystals. This essentially gives you the Druid Thorn spell for 10 minutes. And as you saw, it takes less than 10 minutes to run this dungeon. So both of these items really increase the amount of AoE damage you're doing. So we're going to cast the Crystal Charge, and we have a Crystal Charge on our bar. The final thing that we'll be using to make this a little bit easier is we're going to go ahead and drink a free action potion once we get over to the right side of the dungeon because of all of the stuns. Remember, this is just kind of fun to seeing how far we can push the dungeon with minimal amount of gold spent. This is just for fun, but if you're wanting to speedrun and hit your lockout as soon as possible, this is the way to do it. So let's go ahead and get it, and we'll start the timer. So we will be doing the same thing here, and as you can see, we are running way faster. The Zanzapot 20% honestly makes the game a lot more fun just because of how fast you're running. That should have pulled everything, and again, we are strafing to try and block and parry as much as we can. But because of how fast we are running, we might actually have to slow down just a little bit at the end of some rooms to make sure that we are still casting our Consecration and making sure that we are pulling everything. We are already doing more damage because of the Crystal Spire, so things are going to be much lower health by the time we get to the end of the left side. So you see, we are under 1 minute, middle is already done and pulled, and we are still at full health, full mana. Again, you can cast Seal of Wisdom, Seal of Light if you need to as we are going. That should have pulled everything. Careful of the door frames. If you're not paying attention, you can get stuck. I've had it happen on stream numerous times. Oof, we are going a little bit faster. So hopefully we can have the rest of the left side pulled before the 2-minute mark. Again, you can cleanse, but now that we are having an extra 36 spell power, we are really honestly not going to lose much health. You might not think 36 spell power is a big deal, but again, you're being hit hundreds of times while you're doing this. So the procs from your shield and the procs from your armor are going to happen pretty frequently. And not only that, like I said, not only are they taking the damage from your red aura, but they are now taking damage from the Crystal Spire. So we are now moving on to the right side at full health and almost full mana. And everything is kind of trailing behind us. So as you saw, we had the Force of Will proc even though we are far ahead. And now we are going to pop our free action potion to avoid getting stunned. This will not last the full right side clear, but at least it will last for most of it, making it a much faster and cleaner run. So for us free action potions, the materials are a little over 1 gold if you can make them yourself. If you enjoy fishing, then the materials are incredibly easy to get and become cheap. Even if you are lower geared, I would not recommend wasting the gold on free action potions. So that is our first stun, and we are almost at the end of the hallway. So that increased our time, increased our speed by a pretty significant amount. Let's go ahead and put Seal of Light up just to help with the healing a little bit. We obviously don't need the mana. And let's see if we can go ahead and finish this dungeon in 4 minutes. Cleaning up the runners might take a little bit of extra time, but we are already in the corner and we already have our consecration ready. We will wait for everything to get to us. we will wait for our stun. So again, we are getting chain stunned. We'll drop the consecration, wait for the stun, wait for the stun, and we'll drop a crystal grenade. So as you see, everything is already in its run state, everything's running back, and we're going to have the dungeon done in about 4 minutes. So if you count running out time, maybe 5 minutes per reset, that way you can have the dungeon resetting every 20 to 25 minutes very easily. Again, you can log off and go farm something else on another character while you're waiting for your Paladin reset to finish. So there you go, 4 minutes and 2 seconds to completely clear the Stockades. That's pretty darn good, even if you're not carrying somebody. If you loot all the bodies, you're looking at maybe 2 to 3 gold maximum of pure, maybe not even that much. But if you're making even 10 gold from the greens per run, which might be a little generous, it's still not a bad farm. And we're already running out at the 4.5 minute mark. After the reset, we are done within 5 minutes. So there you go. That's how you can push the Paladin Stockades farm, not to its absolute limits, but its limits without having to break the bank. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing. If you want to learn more about Paladin, or just watch me do stuff live on stream, please come watch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/thedukeoftbc, where I stream every day, 6 p.m. PST, 9 p.m. EST. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you guys next time.